My parents demanded that I liquidate my emergency fund and sell my car to pay my brother's loan shark debt because family rescues family. I asked for time to find another way, but they called me cold-hearted and threatened to cut me off emotionally and financially. The call that shattered my world didn't come with a warning. It wasn't a siren in the night or the screech of tires on pavement. It was the familiar, cheerful ringtone I'd assigned to my mother, a sound that, until that Tuesday evening, had always meant comfort, gossip, or a request for my son Michael's latest adorable antics. "They're on their way over," my husband David said, walking into the kitchen. He had that look on his face, a subtle tightening around his eyes that I'd come to recognize as his family armor, settling into place. "Your mom just called. Said it was urgent." "A family meeting?" I felt a cold knot form in my stomach, a familiar dread that tasted like bile. In my family, a family meeting was never about celebrating a promotion or planning a vacation. It was a euphemism for a crisis, and the epicenter of every crisis was always my younger brother, Sam. To understand the gravity of that evening, you have to understand what David and I had built. We weren't born into wealth. Our life was a testament to 16-hour days, second jobs, and saying no to 1,000 small pleasures so we could say yes to a future. Our small, perfect house in a quiet suburb wasn't inherited. It was earned through years of scrimping, saving, and dreaming, together in a cramped apartment that always smelled faintly of our neighbors cooking. Our son, Michael, a boisterous 5-year-old with David's kind eyes and my stubborn chin, was the sun our world orbited. Everything we did for him. And part of that everything was my emergency fund. It wasn't just a savings account, it was a fortress. A dragon's hoard of meticulously saved dollars, accumulated over a decade of freelance graphic design work I did after my day job, of Christmases where David and I exchanged handmade gifts, of vacations we postponed. It was our shield against the terrifying what-ifs of life. A sudden job loss, a medical catastrophe, a leaky roof in a thunderstorm. It was $80,000 of peace of mind. It was my promise to my son that the world could turn upside down, but his life would remain stable. Then there was my car, a reliable 3-year-old sedan that I'd bought with a bonus I'd worked myself to the bone for. It wasn't a luxury vehicle, but it was mine. It was the chariot of my independence, the vessel that carried me to my job every morning and took Michael to the park on weekends. It was a symbol that I, Lily, a girl who grew up with hand-me-downs while her brother got the newest toys, could build and own something solid. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. David squeezed my hand before opening it. My parents, John and Mary, stood on the porch, their faces etched with a familiar, manufactured gravity. And behind them, shuffling his feet like a chastised teenager, was Sam. At 29, he still hadn't outgrown the look of a boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar. The air in our living room turned thick and suffocating. My mother immediately started fussing over the throw pillows, a nervous habit that always preceded a storm. My father stood stiffly by the fireplace, his arms crossed, his jaw set. Sam sank into an armchair, avoiding my gaze, his eyes fixed on a loose thread on the rug. "So," my father began, his voice a low rumble that commanded attention. "We need to talk." I glanced at David, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "We're in this together." My mother sat down, wringing her hands. "Lily, honey, it's Sam. He's in trouble. Bad trouble." I took a slow, deliberate breath. I'd heard this overture before. The time he'd maxed out their credit cards on a, sure thing, crypto investment. The time he'd borrowed from his employer, and they'd had to pay it back to keep him out of jail. The gambling debts that had started small and grown with each bailout. "What is it this time?" I asked, my voice flatter than I intended. My father's eyes narrowed. "Don't take that tone with us, young lady. This is serious." He paused for dramatic effect. "He owes money, a lot of money, to people you don't want to owe money to." "Loan sharks," Sam mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. He finally looked up, and his eyes were hollowed out, dark pools of terror in a pale face. But underneath the fear, I saw something else, something ugly and familiar, entitlement. The words hung in the air, ugly and sharp. This was a new low, a descent into a circle of hell even Sam hadn't visited before. "How much?" David asked, his voice calm and steady, a rock in my churning sea of emotions. He was always the anchor, the one who could face the storm without flinching. My father looked at my mother, who looked at Sam, who finally met my gaze, his eyes glassy. $75,000, he said. The number hit me like a physical blow. $75,000. It wasn't just a number, it was a weight, a crushing, suffocating thing. It was a down payment on another house. It was 4 years of college tuition. It was a life-altering amount of money. I saw my parents flinch as the number was spoken aloud, and I knew they couldn't cover it. For the first time, Sam had dug a hole so deep that their parental safety net had snapped. And that's when all their eyes turned to me. The weight in the room shifted, and I felt it land squarely on my shoulders. "Lily," my mother said, her voice taking on a wheedling, pleading tone that set my teeth on edge. It was her, for the good of the family, voice, the one that had guilted me into giving up my weekends, my savings, my peace of mind for years. "We're at our wits' end. Your father and I have drained our savings. We've remortgaged the house before for his mistakes. There's nothing left. You're his big sister. You have to help him." "Help him how?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I could feel the walls of my fortress, my beautiful, hard-won fortress, beginning to tremble. My father stepped forward, his expression hardening into one of grim resolution. "We've already discussed it. There's only one way. You're going to liquidate your emergency fund, and you're going to sell your car. That should be enough to cover the debt, and maybe a little extra for the interest." The audacity of it stole my breath. It wasn't a request, it was a decree. They had sat down, not to figure out how to help Sam change, but to figure out how to liquidate my life. They had inventoried my assets, my security, my independence, and decided which pieces were disposable enough to sacrifice for my brother's latest disaster. All my years of work, all my sacrifices reduced to a simple solution for their problem. A bitter, hysterical laugh almost escaped my lips. I looked at Sam, the golden boy, the perpetual screw-up for whom the rules never applied. A reel of memories played in my mind. Me, at 10, wanting a new bike for my birthday, being told we couldn't afford it. 2 months later, Sam, who was 6, got a brand new one, for no reason at all, because he'd, quote, had a tough week at school. Me, working a part-time job all through high school to save for a used car, while Sam was just handed the keys to my mom's old one when he turned 16. Him dropping out of college after 1 semester, costing my parents thousands, and being welcomed home with a party to cheer him up. I remembered the time he disappeared for 2 months after a particularly bad fight about his spending. He came back thinner, with the story about finding himself, and they'd welcomed him back with tears and open arms, blind to the fact that he was just running from another problem he'd created. That incident, instead of being a wake-up call, had somehow cemented their resolve to protect him from every consequence, no matter the cost. And now, the cost was me. The cost was my son. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the silent room with the force of a grenade. My father's face turned a dangerous shade of red. "What did you say?" I said, "No," I repeated, my voice gaining strength. I felt David's hand find mine under the table, his grip firm and reassuring. "Mom, Dad, that fund is for my family, for Michael. It's for if David or I lose our jobs or if Michael gets sick. The car is how I get to work. It's how I provide for my family. You can't just demand it." My mother's face crumpled, the tears welling on command. "But it's just money, Lily. It's just a car. You can make more money. You can buy another car." "This is your brother's life we're talking about. Family rescues family. That's what we've always taught you. You taught me to be responsible." I shot back, the pain and anger of a lifetime finally bubbling over. "You taught me to work hard and save for a rainy day." "Well, this isn't my rainy day. It's a hurricane Sam created. And you want me to sacrifice my family's only lifeboat to save him from a storm he sailed into himself?" "You are being so cold-hearted," my father boomed, his voice shaking the room. "I can't believe we raised such a selfish daughter. Those are just excuses to hoard your money. You only think about yourself, your perfect little life, your perfect little family. Do you want us to disown you? Is that what you want, to be cut off from this family forever?" The threat, the ultimate emotional blackmail, hung in the air. For a moment, I felt the old programming kick in. The desire to please, to be the good daughter, to keep the peace at any cost. But then I looked at David, his face a mask of quiet fury on my behalf. And I thought of Michael sleeping soundly in his bed upstairs, blissfully unaware that his future was being negotiated like a commodity in our living room. I thought of his Lego castle, his innocent belief that I could keep him safe. And I knew I couldn't break my promise to him. "If keeping my own child safe makes me selfish in your eyes," I said, my voice trembling but firm, "then I guess I'm selfish. I need time to think. Maybe there's another way." "There is no other way," my father yelled, slamming his hand on the mantelpiece, rattling a picture frame of Michael. "The only way is the one we told you. You either help now or you're no daughter of mine." The argument spiraled from there. It was a tornado of accusations and guilt. I was ungrateful. I was cruel. I was throwing my brother to the wolves. I was forgetting where I came from. Sam, for his part, finally spoke up, not to apologize, but to whine. "I can't believe you'd do this to me, Lily. I always thought you loved me." David finally stood up, his 6-foot frame a sudden, imposing presence. "That's enough," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You will not speak to my wife that way in our home. We are not responsible for Sam's choices. This meeting is over." My father looked at David as if he were a bug to be squashed. You stay out of this. This is a family matter. I am her family, David said, his voice like steel. He took a step forward, placing himself slightly in front of me, and our priority is the safety of this family. Now, I think it's time for you to leave. The silence that followed was more violent than the shouting. My parents stared at us, their faces masks of disbelief and fury. Sam, as usual, said nothing, simply staring at the floor, the architect of all this destruction. They left without another word, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. The house felt suddenly cavernous and cold. I collapsed onto the sofa, the adrenaline leaving me shaky and nauseous. David wrapped his arms around me, and for the first time that night, I let myself cry. I cried for the brother I wished I had, for the parents I deserved, and for the family that had just declared war on me. The storm had just begun. Within 10 minutes, my phone started buzzing. Then David's. It was a coordinated assault, a digital blitzkrieg orchestrated by my parents. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people I hadn't spoken to in months, were all sending messages. My parents had wasted no time in spinning their narrative. From Aunt Carol, Lily, I am so disappointed in you. Your mother is heartbroken. She called me sobbing. How can you abandon your brother like this? From Uncle Mark, your father told me what happened. You need to do the right thing. Blood is thicker than water. Don't let your husband turn you against your own. From my cousin Jessica, I can't believe you'd choose money over family. Sam could get seriously hurt. That will be on your conscience forever. Each message was a fresh stab of betrayal. They didn't know the years of context, the endless cycle of bailouts, the blatant favoritism. They only knew the story my parents were selling. The story of the cold, wealthy daughter and the poor, victimized son. We turned our phones on silent, but the screens kept lighting up, a constant, flashing reminder that we had been tried and convicted by a jury of our own relatives. The emotional cutoff my father had threatened was being executed with brutal efficiency. We spent the next few days in a state of siege. The constant barrage of messages eventually slowed to a trickle, replaced by an unnerving silence. It felt like the eerie calm in the eye of a hurricane. We tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for Michael's sake. But a cloud of anxiety hung over our home. Every time a car slowed down on our street, my heart would leap into my throat. I found myself checking the locks on the doors multiple times before bed. The other shoe dropped on Friday afternoon. I was at work, trying to focus on a design layout, when my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something compelled me to answer. Is this Lily? A man's voice asked. It was gravelly, low, and utterly devoid of warmth, like stones grinding together. Who is this? I asked, my hand tightening around the phone. Let's just say I'm a business associate of your brother Sam, the voice said. He's got a debt with us that's overdue, a significant debt. He told us his big sister would be taking care of it. The blood drained from my face. My office, once a familiar sanctuary, suddenly felt cold and exposed. I don't know what you're talking about. The man chuckled, a dry, rattling sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. Oh, I think you do. He gave us your number, your address too. 124 Oak Street, right? Nice little house in the suburbs. A kid, right? A little boy? Michael? It would be a real shame if something were to happen to your quiet little life because of Sam's poor business decisions. He knew my son's name. The threat was no longer veiled. It was a cold, hard promise. The world tilted on its axis. Don't you dare threaten my family, I whispered, my voice shaking so hard I could barely form the words. Not a threat, just a statement of fact, he said. People who don't pay their debts find that their worlds get very complicated. You have 48 hours to get us our money. We'll be in touch. He hung up. I sat there, frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. My breath came in ragged gasps. They knew where I lived. They knew about Michael. They knew his name. A wave of pure, primal fear washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. This was the hurricane. And we were no longer in the lifeboat, we were in the water. I called David, my voice a frantic mess as I relayed the conversation. He told me to come home immediately. The rest of the day was a blur. When I got home, David was already on the phone with his own story. He'd received a similar call, just minutes after mine. We sat in our kitchen, the place where we planned our future, and faced the horrifying truth. It was too much of a coincidence. How did these men get our unlisted numbers so quickly? How did they know so much about us? The answer was unthinkable. A betrayal so profound it felt like a violation of the natural order. But it was the only one that made sense. My parents. My brother. After we had refused to give them our life savings, they had gone to the loan sharks. They had offered us up as collateral. They had painted a target, on our backs, on our son's back, to save Sam. They had told these predators, don't worry about him. Go after her. She has the money. That night, the fear solidified into something else. Cold, hard resolve. This was no longer a family dispute. This wasn't about hurt feelings or emotional blackmail. This was about the physical safety of our child, My parents and brother hadn't just cut us off, they had actively thrown us to the wolves. The next day, a black sedan with tinted windows parked across the street from our house. It just sat there for hours, a silent, menacing presence. We saw a man get out, light a cigarette, and stare directly at our front door. Michael was playing in the living room with his Legos, and I had to physically pull him away from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. We were prisoners in our own home. That's it, David said, his face grim, his eyes like chips of ice. We're done being victims. We're fighting back. On Monday morning, we weren't calling family, we were calling a lawyer. We found a man named Arthur Vance, a former prosecutor with a reputation for being a shark in his own right. We sat in his plush office, the smell of leather and old books a strange comfort, and laid out the entire sordid story. We played him the voicemails we'd saved, showed him the text messages, described the car parked outside our house. Arthur listened patiently, his face unreadable. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "This is beyond a family squabble," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "What your parents and brother have done is called endangerment. They have knowingly and willfully placed you and your child in a dangerous situation. The loan sharks are guilty of extortion and harassment. We have a two-front war here, but our first priority is your safety." His advice was swift and decisive. First, document everything. Save every message, record every call. We were to start a detailed log of any suspicious activity. Second, go to the police. Not the local precinct, but directly to the organized crime division. Arthur made the call himself. Third, sever all contact. Block every number, every social media profile. Create a digital fortress. Fourth, secure our home. He gave us the number of a security firm. We left his office feeling like we could breathe for the first time in a week. We had a plan. We had an ally. That evening, 2 detectives came to our house. They were professional and serious, and they took our claims at face value, especially after we described the car. They promised to increase patrols in our area and opened an investigation into the loan shark operation. The next day, security cameras were installed around our property. The little red recording lights were a profound comfort. We changed our phone numbers. We followed Arthur's instructions to the letter. The silence from our family was no longer a punishment, it was a shield. The black sedan disappeared, the threatening calls stopped. For a few weeks, an uneasy peace settled over our lives. We started to feel safe again. And then we were served with a lawsuit. It was delivered by a courier, a thick manila envelope that felt impossibly heavy. I stared at the legal jargon, my mind struggling to comprehend it. My parents and Sam were suing us. The grounds were so absurd, so twisted, that they were almost laughable. They were accusing us of reckless endangerment and infliction of emotional distress upon Sam. Their argument, crafted by some bottom-feeding lawyer, was that by refusing to pay the debt, we had knowingly left Sam in a dangerous situation, and our refusal was a malicious act designed to cause him harm. They were trying to use the courts to force us to pay, painting themselves as the concerned parents and us as the monstrous, uncaring relatives who had abandoned him to violent criminals. "I don't believe this," I whispered, sinking onto a kitchen chair. "I really don't believe it." David read the document over my shoulder, his expression hardening into granite. "They've lost their minds. They put us in danger, and now they're suing us for protecting ourselves." Arthur Vance was not amused. "This is a classic SLAPP suit," he explained over the phone. "Strategic lawsuit against public participation. It's frivolous, it's designed to intimidate you and bleed you dry with legal fees. But they've made a catastrophic mistake. They've just opened the door for us to present all of our evidence in a court of law. They think they can control the narrative. We're about to show them what the truth looks like." The next few months were a blur of legal preparations. We gave depositions, sitting in a sterile conference room, while their lawyer tried to twist my words to paint me as a vindictive sister. We handed over every piece of evidence we had. The recordings of my father's screaming demands, the dozens of manipulative text messages from our extended family, the police report we'd filed, a copy of the invoice from the security company, and the chilling recording of the loan shark's threat. The court date arrived on a cold, gray morning. Walking into the courthouse felt surreal. On the other side of the aisle sat my parents and Sam. My mother wouldn't look at me, her face pale and drawn. My father glared, his face a mask of self-righteous fury. Sam just looked pathetic, a grown man hiding behind his parents. They looked like strangers to me, people I might have known in another life. Their lawyer went first, painting a picture of a loving family torn apart by a daughter's greed. He spoke of Sam's youthful mistakes and my parents' desperate attempts to save their son. He portrayed David and me as cold, calculating, and obsessed with money, living in our comfortable house while my brother's life hung in the balance. Then it was Arthur's turn. He didn't shout, he didn't grandstand. He simply, methodically, dismantled their entire case. He started by playing the recording of the first threatening call from the loan shark. The judge's expression tightened. "Your Honor," Arthur said calmly, "my clients received this call less than 72 hours after they refused to give the plaintiffs nearly $100,000. The caller knew their address. He knew they had a young son. The plaintiffs are not the victims here. They are the ones who provided the ammunition to the criminals." He then submitted the phone records, showing the flurry of calls between my parents and Sam, and then from Sam to the number that had threatened us. He presented the text messages, a waterfall of emotional manipulation. He put the detective on the stand, who testified that the individuals my clients had identified were known associates of a violent criminal lending ring that was under active investigation. The final devastating blow came when Arthur called me to the stand. He had me recount the night of the family meeting. "And what was your father's response when you refused to immediately hand over your life savings?" Arthur asked. "He threatened to disown me," I said, my voice clear and steady. "He called me cold-hearted and selfish." "And did he or your mother or your brother ever express any concern for the financial security of you, your husband, or your 5-year-old son?" "No," I said. "Their only concern was getting the money for Sam." "And when you learned that they had given your personal information to these violent criminals, putting your child's life at risk, how did that make you feel?" I looked across the room, directly at my parents. For the first time, my mother met my gaze. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Was it shame? Or just fear of being caught? "It felt," I said, the words tasting like ash, like the ultimate betrayal. "It felt like they were telling the world that my child's safety was worth less than my brother's gambling habit." The courtroom was silent. My parents' lawyer had no questions for me. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She looked at my parents and Sam with an expression of profound disgust. Her ruling was swift and brutal. "This lawsuit is not just frivolous," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "It is an abhorrent abuse of the judicial system. You came into this court and perjured yourselves, attempting to paint yourselves as victims when you were, in fact, the aggressors. You knowingly endangered your daughter, your son-in-law, and your own grandson. And when that failed to extort money from them, you filed this malicious suit as a tool of revenge and further harassment." She dismissed their case with prejudice, meaning they could never file it again. She ordered them to pay for our entire legal defense, every single penny. And then she went one step further. Given the evidence of harassment and the clear potential for future conflict, she declared, "This court grants the defendants a 2-year restraining order against the plaintiffs. You are to have no contact, direct or indirect, with Lily, David, or their son Michael. Stay away from their home, their places of work, and their child's school. Do you understand?" My father started to rise, his face purple with rage, but his lawyer pulled him back down. They understood. We walked out of the courthouse into the bright, cold sunlight, feeling empty. There was no triumphant joy, no sense of victory. Just a deep, hollow sadness for the family I had lost, and a profound sense of relief for the family I had saved. Justice had been served. The law had protected us, but the wounds were deep. A few weeks later, the check from my parents' lawyer arrived, covering Arthur's fees with a significant amount left over. David and I sat at our kitchen table, staring at it. It felt like blood money.